Back, you're watching Your World at 10. Now, he's the man who helped Bharti achieve its Africa ambitions. Shankar of Standard Chartered is the deal maker of the season, and tonight he talks to me about the African market, the dispute over Zain Nigeria and how Bharti can resolve that, and how Bharti can monetize this transaction. Well, here's an exclusive interview with Shankar. What do you expect that this Bharti-Zain deal will be remembered for most?
I think it's a transformational deal for Bharti. To steal lines from Neil Armstrong, this is a big step for Bharti, but equally I think it's a giant leap for India, and it's a giant leap for South-South cooperation. It is the first transformational deal that India has done in Africa, and as I've stated before in some other forums, China has made huge strides into Africa, and this is the first time that India is doing a deal of a size and stature which befits its historical position in Africa.
These are descriptions.
So it's great for Bharti.
Sure.
It's great for Bharti. It's equally great for India.
These are descriptions, Shankar, that we also used when Bharti was in negotiations for MTN, right? That was supposed to be, in fact, the deal that would herald this South-South cooperation or the South-South partnership. Unfortunately, that did not succeed as anticipated. Does Zain really, in all honesty, fit the gap that MTN left?
Look, Zain's Africa is obviously smaller than MTN. No question about that, but it is in 15 countries in Africa and is number 1 or number 2 in 14 of the 15. It's got a pretty strong position in large parts of Central and Western Africa, so it is a terrific proposition, and I think under the leadership of Bharti and Sunil Mittal and Akhil and Manoj Kohli, it'll go from strength to strength. So it is, I think, a very good proposition and a great fit for Bharti.
Shankar, you have a history of doing deals in Africa. Now, all M&A transactions, big or small, face the challenge of getting the integration part right, getting the management part right. Price, of course, is the first point on which we measure or base the success of a transaction. But the rest of it is far more difficult to achieve. What are some of the challenges that are specific to such transactions taking place in Africa that you can share with us based on your previous deal experience?
I think I may be stating the obvious, but Africa is a continent and not a country. So what we are really talking about here is an acquisition which spans 15 countries. So clearly it does present integration challenges, dealing with 15 regulatory regimes, 15 governments and so on. That's clearly one part of the challenge. The second is that basically infrastructure in Africa is relatively underdeveloped in many parts of Africa. But on the other hand, therein lies the advantages for somebody like Bharti, which has been toughened and battle-hardened, if you will, in a brutally competitive market like India. The ability to export its minute factory model, and taking to Africa what is a very compelling proposition to its customers is going to be terrific. If you look at the ARPUs in Africa, they are much higher than India, albeit the minutes, the average minute usage by an African consumer is lower than India as well.
All right, let me come to the other sticky issue, and that is one that you're already familiar with. For the past many months, you've been working closely on it. The dissenting shareholders in Zain's Nigeria business. Now, what kind of protection has Bharti built around itself to ensure that any potential liability that may emerge from those dissenting shareholders or that dissent or that dispute, Bharti is already covered for? Can you take us through some of those details?
Well, all I can tell you is that in any sale and purchase agreement of this nature, where such issues are identified, there will be protections in terms of indemnities and warranties from the seller. And that is what any reasonable buyer would expect and what any reasonable seller would give. And that's what is here in this agreement.
All right. What is the best course in such a situation where one part of the acquisition that you're making is, is sort of in dispute? You have a couple of dissenting shareholders that may not actually be able to impact the total transaction in any fashion, but can make life a little miserable for you. What does your previous deal experience tell you, that the best thing to offer them once the deal is closed is potential exit opportunities?
No, I would say the first thing you would do is post the transaction, because you really don't have any locus standi prior to closing the transaction. But once you close the transaction, I think the approach that I would always advocate to any of my clients is to negotiate with those shareholders. They are your, quote unquote, your new shareholders in your new company. So the first course option is obviously to negotiate, understand their issues, and see whether you can meet their legitimate demands and needs. So that's what you would do. Now, post that discussion, what happens is going to be hugely iterative and speculative.
But give us a sense of what some of the potential solutions are if the negotiations don't necessarily are fully successful, or if those shareholders, don't want to stay invested, then you've got to give them exit opportunities, right?
Yeah, look, the point is we haven't yet spoken to the shareholders. We can't because, frankly, only yesterday the definitive agreement was signed, and then again it takes time to close the transaction once the conditions precedent are met. It's only after that we can actually engage in any formal discussion. So until then, you wouldn't know what their concerns are, or what their challenges are, or what their wishes are.
Shankar,
but clearly the attitude is one of negotiation.
All right. How do you monetize such a transaction? I'm putting this slightly weirdly, but what I'm trying to understand is that now that they will own this African entity at the holding company level, I'm told Bharti tells us last night that they're going to obviously consolidate the accounts over a period of time. Is there some aspect or opportunity available to be able to monetize this in any fashion, that is, over a period of time in the future, maybe bring in some other kind of investor participation into the African business, or for instance, private equity, or maybe look to list this African business separately in some fashion, or, I may be totally off the mark here, but is even a dual listing an opportunity that you think Bharti might want to explore? Obviously, once the deal is done, they've focused on turning this business around and all of that, 2, 3, 4 years down the line.
Look, all those which you mentioned, Menaka, are possibilities, but clearly none of us have even talked about them or explored them or discussed them. Clearly our focus has been on completing the transaction very quickly and consummating it. So that's really been our focus. So whatever possibilities you're talking about are real possibilities, but whether they apply to Bharti or not is a different issue. We haven't really given serious thought to it. Our real focus has been, A, to consummate the transaction, and B, to then think about, how do you manage the company moving forward. The real work starts after the transaction closes. It's about how do you drive the synergies, how do you drive the synergies both on the capital expenditure side and the operating expenditure side. That's where we are going to devote our synergies. Financial engineering takes a distant second.
This financial engineering, as you referred to it, what are some of the opportunities that such a transaction could throw up 3, 4 years down the line? Just give us a sense of what the opportunities are. I mean, do they actually range from anywhere between bringing in private equity participation to looking at some kind of other listing, external listing, to a dual listing? Or if you can narrow it down for us to what you think could be some of the more addressable opportunities over the next 3 to 5 years, based on your experience of doing transactions like this?
See, I mean, let me take it on a broader basis rather than discuss about this specific transaction, because,
Sure.
as I said, we haven't even discussed it, right?
Sure, sure.
But if I were to put my thinking hat on, and it was company X in a similar situation rather than this specific situation in the telecom space, I don't think, bringing private equity operators in, private equity investors in is really going to make a difference. And why would you do that? I mean, it does nothing. In fact, if anything, you should be trying to increase your stake in the entity you have bought to the extent you believe that it's value accretive. So, frankly, you should be spending your time on extracting synergies, operational synergies, on increasing your equity stake to the extent it is feasible, and then looking at things like companies in India have done, which is, can we spin off certain assets which can be spun off, like towers.
Okay.
Which a lot of companies in India have done.
Okay.
Those sorts of things are probably, is there a possibility on a pan-Africa basis for companies to share towers and infrastructure? Those are the sorts of things I would look at rather than should I be listing the Africa vehicle or should I be bringing private equity investors in?
Do you envisage?
But again, these are all hypothetical and this is long term. But since you asked a question, I'm just this is more gut feel, seat of the pants answer.